Okay, well, I'm going to take back the screen, and Chris and I are going to get started. Chris McMurray. Chris, I've got some data to go through, like last time, to tee you up. So I'm going to show some of that data first, and then Chris is going to come on, introduce himself, and walk through a whole bunch of stuff for the next hour and a half. So get ready to be deluged with stuff about what's going on out there.
Nice.
Yeah. So first of all, we did, we do our big national survey. Then we did a secondary survey in January. It was about an even split between the admin ranks and the teacher ranks. And this is what came out of it. Actually, first, let me show you the earlier data. The big national study shows that we upticked in spend across America by about 7.5 billion in a single year. Huge jump, like a massive jump. And that was just CARES Act 1, which still isn't all the way spent out. And then we got CARES Act 2, which is 4 times the size of the first one. So expect even more. This is our prediction. So last year, 16.6 billion in hardware, up by 4.5 billion. Major software systems, your learning management systems, student information systems, human resources, all that stuff was only up by 900 million. That's just a maturity thing. A lot of schools were they could afford hardware, but they weren't really looking at major systems yet. We're predicting another uptick by at least 400 million. So retain the gain, 4.5 billion in spend, another 400 million up above that in this year. And then in software, digital curriculum took a $2.1 billion jump. We expect it to jump another 2 billion this year. This is where a lot of investment is going to go on by schools, is in the software and application side, particularly learning objects of value, courses, courseware of value, digital libraries, ebooks, all that stuff. Paper resources will continue to decline. The consumer comparison was 13.1 billion, of course, being spent in K-12, but the consumer markets really jumped in April, May, June of last year. Starting late March, April, May, June. It was starting to slow down, like schools were starting to catch up to what the consumer market spend, but then everybody went shopping when schools got closed, and they decided that they wanted their own kids to learn, grandparents, parents, and they were buying things and ordering subscriptions online to various libraries of digital curriculum, and then fighting homeschooling as an alternative and all that kind of stuff. So we talked about those numbers yesterday. The opt-out level is majestic. So student online attendance, here's what the January survey showed. 35% of kids aren't showing up online. Those are the ghosting kids. This is particularly true of big urbans. 15% of students are getting the wrong digital materials a good deal of the time, which is a problem for a lot of schools because if you have the wrong materials, you can't really follow along. Students who can't easily navigate online, 34%. I think that's better than we thought it would be, I mean, Ivy talked a little bit about this, like having to help all the parents and students turn things on, find the right stuff, right folders. Students who have opted out, this is the big numbers. Now, the numbers we had in the original survey, the big national survey it came out to about 3.6% had opted out, but the January survey showed they weren't coming back. And the national average is now 15% are not coming back. They've disenrolled. They're doing something else now. And then students have achievement losses. 51% of students in America have some level of achievement loss. The teachers who can't easily navigate and use online systems or apps, 30% need more training. That's probably going to continue indefinitely because people keep buying more software that you also need more training for. And then we asked, teachers, are they easily able to personalize? And 47% said no. That's obvious, like how are you supposed to do that when you're mad scrambling on everything? So the teachers who are overly sidetracked, and this is where Learning Council put a lot of their attention on our hybrid logistics conversation we had yesterday, is that people weren't realizing that when you move to digital systems, you suddenly are hit with a lot more traffic digitally than you ever had in the physical realm. So email, chat bots, assignments going out, coming back, things happening, parents calling you. It gets kind of wild. So the traffic aspect is why we're talking so much now about hybrid logistics and the meaningfulness of your new responsibilities, which Chris is really going to get into. Because you're moving to a digital distribution model. So the percentage of teachers feeling overwhelmed or burnt out right now is 74%. And it's because of that traffic and changed environment of the distribution of teaching and learning. So I'm going to give this over to Chris on our digital learning experience conversation that he's going to walk you through. It starts and is centered around the EduJedi dictionary. So Chris, I'm going to pass you the
mouse control.
Yeah, you're gonna be mouse controlling my
Okay,
screen.
fantastic.
Okay, so
That's
here you
awesome.
go.
So thanks very much. So that's all very frightening, but also a fantastic segue into what we're going to talk about. But I need to go back to what we were talking about in terms of hardware for a moment, and point out that a connected conversation is around a gap between what systems think they need in terms of hardware and what they actually do need based on what the student's experience is going to be. And so it goes something like IT says, hey, we can get you whatever you want. And then teaching and learning says either, okay, here's the spec, here's exactly what they're going to be doing, and they have a plan and know where they're going. Or they say, I don't know. And if they say that, you're just not ready, right? You're going to go buy some hardware that may or may not match a need that you haven't yet designed. And if you toss that in on top of all the stuff that LeiLani was just talking about in terms of why these trends are occurring, and what this load is, this digital load, and why teachers are starting to feel burned out, rightfully so. Been there. It's all connected, right? Have a plan. Know what you're doing as you walk into this. Yeah, you just got thrown in. However, there's resources and people that can help to make it so that you're creating those rich experiences for kids. So that's really today what I want to share in a very in an abridged version, is really some information that is critical for you as an educator, as an administrator, as a planner of learning, and a designer of learning experiences. Things that you need to know about how to choose those resources as you're starting to populate your ecosystem. Some vocabulary and setting sort of a floor for what that vocabulary might be, and really then starting to go through a model for how to design learning experiences that will leverage and utilize the technology for really what it's supposed to be, and that is to help the humans, right? And
Yeah, and
so,
hey, Chris, just
yeah.
we can go through until 2 p.m.
Oh, okay,
You should
perfect.
be able to get through everything and have time for questions.
Okay, fantastic. So that's me on the screen. I was a teacher for a long time. I was an instructional coach. I was a principal. I was an assistant soup and a chief academic officer. And I've been around to this particular conversation for some time. As Joshua had mentioned when he started his undergrad, the name of the game wasn't necessarily personalized learning, and it wasn't necessarily let's use the technology to facilitate a personalization, although it was beginning. So this is not a new conversation, and there are systems that have been at this for many, many years and are being very successful at it. So really what we're talking about is how can we use the digital resources that we have, how can we start to use that to that nonlinear capacity of the resources that we have available now to provide for more humanity to be built into a design and to start designing learning. So that's really sort of the basis of the conversation today. As we start thinking, oh, okay, there we go. Hey, I do have mouse control. Fantastic. As you start to think about, for example, I'm looking at some notes that I jotted down based on Lonnie's research that she shared. Not showing up, right? 35% of kids are not showing up. 34% of the kids can't navigate the system. 15% of my kids have opted out. If this was an in-person, if this was 5 years ago, those types of numbers become frightening, right? And there's then some hair on fire in a school system if those are the kinds of numbers that you're starting to see. That same hair on fire should be happening now, and it should be alarming that 35% of the kids are not showing up, and it's connected to how you design the experience. It's not the kids. You can't blame the kids. It's not the technology. It isn't. It's the design. And we have some design challenges ahead of us. So this particular this particular graphic is not brand new. This is actually something that was developed somewhere around 2015 by the Learning Council. And this is really, it's a great illustration of how to think about learning objects. And so this is a scale of sophistication. And what you want to take out of this is not only a brief understanding of what examples of each one of those are, but where you should be along this spectrum in terms of looking for resources that are going to be high leverage for you in creating engaging experiences that are going to help avoid some of these opting out and achievement loss issues that are coming up now. So on the very left-hand side is the digital document side, and that's kind of the low end of that sophistication scale, because this is a Google Doc, right? It's a Word doc. It does not a whole lot. It's not interactive. It may or may not connect to other things, and it lives in isolation. It's probably the smallest unit of learning object that you could possibly build with. And it's static. It doesn't do a lot. So hence the engagement aspect of that and the educational aspect of that particular learning object is going to be relatively low, and it's going to be heavy on the teacher's side and heavy on the learner's side. You move up the scale into single loop animations, and this is really something spins in your PowerPoint slide, or it blends in, or it's a very simple type of a movement. Again, it's not connected to anything. It just is. It's a step up from a Word doc, and it kind of does a couple of things, but it's really not grabbing anyone. Into the video category, and the video category is where you start to see some learner agency being promoted and built and supported. Because with a video, this could be the teacher records a segment of content on a particular topic, and they create a video, and then they post the video to wherever, and then all of a sudden the student has the ability to pause, fast forward, rewind, stop, replay, all of the things that help them to start to cement that information and that content in their mind, and then be able to do something with it. That's the first time they can actually exercise any sort of control other than simply not acknowledging it. And that's a big step, right? That's a step in the right direction, because as we move up the sophistication scale, we're also moving up the student agency scale, or learner agency scale, and that's where we have to exist. We have to live in that high agency sort of a world. So we move up into collections, and these are bits and pieces of things. Could be video, could be collections of text, could be applications, could be a number of things that all of a sudden now have context and are then searchable and have some connectivity between them, and that really helps them to begin to have some control, more control than video perhaps, but learners can navigate through that stuff, and they can get what they need and then move forward. That creates a line at this graphic, and you'll notice at the top there's an arrow pointing toward more instructional planning and one pointing toward more automated learning. The defining line between those two, more instructional planning time needed by the teacher and more automated learning by the learners, is critical, because at that line we jump over into the feedback level of sophistication, and a learning object at that feedback level all of a sudden starts answering questions that the learner has. It starts giving feedback based on learner input, and that's a significant tipping point for a learning object, because that allows more time for the teacher, who is now not the one necessarily giving all the feedback and answering all the questions, allows that teacher to start increasing the humanity and start to build a lot of those other relationships, and start focusing on SEL, and start focusing on meeting other students' needs and personalizing. And that's awesome, because that's where we all want to be and where we all need to be. So we move up into the coding range, and this is amateur coding. This isn't sitting down and writing an app. This is me as a designer of learning, creating a WordPress site, and it creates a sort of a world. And some of us who used Moodle in the past could create similar types of things, but it's really intended to create kind of an immersive experience, and you can move through it and around it as a learner. And that's good because it creates autonomy, right? It allows the student to move and navigate and modulate in the learning experience. And then we jump up into that highly designed digital courseware world. And this is, I use the word world because it is that, right? It creates, these learning objects create a world where the student or the learner is immersed and has lateral ability, may have an ungating function within that courseware where they can move at their own pace. It really starts to get further down the line in terms of personalization, and it will absolutely be individualizing. But this is where we want to be. And so the things on the right hand side of that document, those learning objects, if those are the Legos that you're using to build a design, a learning design, then you want to be using the ones on the sophistication scale that are on the right, because that's going to give you back more time. You're gonna spend less time sort of sifting around. So understand that, because that's how we define the characteristics of digital, the curriculum resources and learning objects. So the next layer on top of that, and I'm gonna share with you 3 layers. This one really talks about learning objects as they appear in terms of granularity, and they're subdivided into a couple of different sections there. One of those is sort of the amateur authorware, and then the bottom one is more of the professionally coded resources. And so you can think of these as ranges of aggregation. And so similar to the left-hand side of the previous graphic that we looked at, the concept level at the top of this graphic is really, again, a disconnected scrap of text. It might be something pulled out of a paragraph about biology. It might be a whole paragraph. It might be a page, but it lives in isolation, and it's not placed into context. It just lives, and it just is. And it's finite, right? It doesn't have connectivity to other things. So there's no lateral movement if you're using those types of things. Into the next level, which is the contextualized level, you take all those concept level things and you mush them all together, and you say, okay, these things are connected, and they're connected because of these things. That's great, but guess who's creating those connections, right? It's going to be the designer, and so that's fine, except you've got time put into that. And so if you can avoid that, maybe there's tools that can help us with that. Up into courses and ebooks, and many of us have created ebooks, and they're awesome. They're portable. It again starts to support student agency and learner agency, and allows movement within and around, and that's good. But that's definitely right. It's a step up, but we're not quite teetering over into something that's much more dynamic. So as soon as we jump into the professionally coded section of this graphic, what we're talking about now is things that are written for a purpose. And we start again at the short form end, which is the granular end, the atomic end. And we look at the applet or the app, and right at this level, the short form application is really going to be discrete, right? It's going to be a math app. It's going to be a spelling app. It's going to be something that doesn't have multiple levels. It is relatively finite. It's not connected to other systems, and it just does what it does, right? And it probably does it very well. But again, it's sort of low. It's sort of low on the sophistication scale. Now, I wouldn't say knuckle dragging, but it just is what it is, right? And unapologetically, it is what it is. But if I want to buy back more human time, that one's going to be a little bit cumbersome to use and design with. Up into the course and courseware level, similar to where we were talking about in the last graphic, this is really where we start to think about using some of the machine learning and using some of the predictive nature of the applications, and creating worlds and allowing navigation in and around. That's where this course and courseware level goes, and you could imagine that the courseware can be core, right? I mean, we talked about sort of diminishing paper requirements, or people speccing less paper in terms of adoption, and it's because we have some very sophisticated courseware available now that we hadn't had in the past. It was kind of coming along. But right now we've got some resources out there that are awesome. They are, and they are very good, and you can design with them. They have a lot of the features that allow you to design with and around, and it's awesome. I mean, as a teacher, love to have those things. And then at the top level of this is that collection level, right? So as we move further into the sophistication scale, now we're talking about AI, we're talking about VR, we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about a lot of the aspects that make these adaptive resources powerful and meaningful in terms of a learning design. And so it's important to understand this layered on top of the previous graphic, because as you start to populate your ecosystem, and as you start to evaluate what you just went on a shopping spree and bought 100 of, and now you're going, I wonder if we need all of these. This is important to understand, because you definitely want to be at the more sophisticated level, and you want to be able to know what it is that you're looking at and for. So keep that in the back of your mind as I layer on another one. Fantastic. You're thinking, oh my gosh, another graphic. And so, yeah, sorry. But this is actually interesting, because historically, this speaks to exactly what we're talking about in my notes, right? Some of that teacher burnout and a lot of the teacher load. I saw the beginnings of this when I was still in the classroom. And we didn't really know what it was. I mean, my colleagues and I would get together and we're like, oh my gosh, I feel so overwhelmed. There's so much coming at me. There's new things, but I don't know how to identify it. And the same thing was being felt across the country. And the Learning Council, of course, with their ear to the ground, heard that and started to do some research and started digging around. And what was identified was this digital load, right? We had created this digital load by accident, and meant well, right? We meant to go out and get all the best stuff, and we were all going digital, and we all wanted to have the best tools available for kids and teachers, but we maybe didn't have a plan, and maybe weren't thinking as completely as we should have, and we wound up creating that stair step down there. And that's sort of a conservative look at the stair step as it exists in a lot of systems today. You can notice by that graphic that the learning objects are changing and shifting as you go grade to grade, right? And so that's what causes a lot of the burden, right? And so the burden that we created was this awesome ecosystem of things that we all purchased, and now go do some to create learning experiences with it. And then by the way, we need PD on all of those. And then we need to rethink how we design what students are doing, and then I also need to shift my thinking as a teacher from I'm planning for teaching to I'm designing for learning, and all of a sudden that gets heavy, right? And so navigating all of that stuff and getting kids to and from where they need to be in their learning experience, knowing that we have to personalize, became huge, and it was identified by the Learning Council as that burden, and then it was also identified that the thing that was missing was this logistics model, right? So the thing that was missing was some ability to move learners around with objects and make them intersect, and really start to think about how are people getting to and from experiences and resources, and that routing piece was missing, right? It's missing, and it continues to be, and it was brought up yesterday, and we will continue to bring it up in the Learning Council conversations, because we have to get to that point so that we can start freeing up our humans to do the human things, and that's critical. It is critical. I just saw a chat comment pop up, which was essentially saying that the technology needs to be used appropriately and not for a babysitter. Absolutely, please, absolutely. We have to be able to design rich experiences with the technology. So this is a critical piece, and this is important to understand and layer on top of those last two graphics that I just shared, because it starts to describe the thing. And now that we know, we can actually help to do better. So I want to hop into the dictionary. If you haven't gotten this dictionary, for sure go do it. It's downloadable. It's an ever-evolving document. Started with 75 definitions of digital characteristics of learning objects and curricular resources. I think we're over 200 at this point, and we'll continue to move and evolve this as a helpful document. What I like about this document is that it takes the feedback and input from educators across the country and helps to create common vocabulary. And as we think about the level of change that we're expecting our systems to undertake, starting with common vocabulary is always important. And for those of you who have been in system change, you know that that's a critical piece and you can't skip it. And this really does a good job of identifying a lot of that vocabulary. So I'm going to go over some of the categories just very briefly before I jump into some standards and things like that and some examples. But that way you'll know exactly what you're looking at and what's under each category. So 9 categories essentially. The actions category really talks about the function of the code that does things, right? The application is designed to do a thing, right? Singularly, discretely, doesn't have to be involved with other processes. It's just what that one thing does. That's where you'll find information about those things. The design really talks about the aesthetics. It talks about navigation. It talks about interoperability. It talks about user onboarding, accessibility, engagement strategies. All of those types of things are in that category. The control category includes discussion about administrative capabilities. And this is important as you consider learning objects, because if you don't have the appropriate controls, it's going to be hard to design with it because you won't have flexibility. And that's a tripping point that I see in a lot of systems where they've picked a finite sort of a product that doesn't allow them the flexibility, which then can't fit the unique need, right? One size doesn't fit all, right? Not everyone fits in the same size cockpit. And so you have to have those controls. The next one is very, very connected customization. These are functions that support the decisions to match the needs of the learners. This is also where we start to talk about, right, individualization versus personalization. And this is a good distinction to make, because individualization really refers to decisions that the learning designer or the teacher is making for the students, whereas personalization refers to systems that support the user's identification and selection of the best tools that match their need at the time. And that's critical, right? So they should be able to, personalization is really the methods and materials that best suit their needs. And that's where we start to see a lot of the power coming. So customization is big. Instruction really goes into some conversation about lesson giving qualities. This is another consideration when you're looking at resources. What are those, right? So what are the content delivery methods? Is tutoring involved? Are we talking about feedback? What are the feedback loops? How are we supporting a deeper understanding of student of the concept for learners? And all of that information is in that category. Mechanisms really talks about digital structures that create steps, right? They're a loop. It's built into a small system. It's in a sequence. All of those types of things. I think I have an example of a mechanism a little bit later, but those are important to understand. The business model is critical as well. This is something that sometimes gets overlooked, and yet it can have an impact on not only your budget, but also on the effectiveness of the design that you have created and the experience of your learners. So for example, freemium we know is not free, right? It's not actually. Newsflash: someone's getting cash somewhere. There's a payment there's a transaction happening at some point, and so those types of business models, if the resource is built upon that, are probably going to have things from category 8, which would be hostile characteristics, which are they're intrusive intentionally, and so they're just going to be up in your face about going to premium or whatever. In-app purchases is a great example of something hostile, but that hostile characteristic can completely derail your experience, and it can send an entire grade level of kids left when they should have been going right. And if you didn't know it, sometimes, trial by fire is fine, but maybe knowing that up front would have been good. And then the last category is really terms and ideas that are important to understand. This is a great document as we talk about a relationship between IT and teaching and learning, because this is the intersection, right? So the trigger is a point in the system that once a user comes to it, the system automatically performs a new function via the trigger, right? In this dictionary, there's some ed speak and there's some tech speak, and so the whole thing deals with sort of technology. And it's a fantastic intersection between those two functions within a school system, because you both have to understand all the things. And so this is a good example, because a trigger, as a teaching and learning guy, maybe didn't know what that was, but I needed to, for sure. And I knew that my IT compatriot would probably understand. And so that's a, hey, pal, let's talk about this because I need to understand. So this is just an example of one of those. Another example, gating. I think I mentioned gating before. This is really a function built within a learning object that allows the user to either move forward at their own pace, or for them to have to wait, or perform a function before moving past that. It's also important that you have controls, right, like we talked about before, so that you could ungate, because creating a gated system can tend to keep students from progressing at their own pace. And when we talk about personalization, what we're talking about is pace, space, place, and removing all of the artificial restrictions around that. So hostile characteristics, I mentioned that. These are invasive things. A modal is a dialogue box, right? It appears in the context of moving through an experience, and then you react to it, and it sends you in a certain direction and gives you different resources. But those are all important things, because this is a sophisticated function, and you should look for those, right? Does the resource that I have use modals? And then nesting is something to look at as well. How easy is it for me to get, as a user, for me to get information, or either as the end user, as a learner, or as a designer? If I have to search too hard to get the information I need, I'm not likely to use it, right? I'm just not. It's going to go on the digital shelf, and I probably won't ever use that. So that's important to consider those things. I know that we're cruising down, the clock is ticking, so I'm going to be quick about standards. The standards for administrators that were developed by the Learning Council and the EduJedi and a number of other partner educators across the country, and the purpose of these is really to start to define what the professional responsibility is for all of the people in a learning system for managing and working with and around learning objects and digital curriculum and systems, right? And so these are all layered, and they all maintain a unique sort of a identity within the broad understanding of it. But for administrators, this is relatively new, right? We've got standards for practice that don't really start talking about what am I supposed to know when it comes to creating a digital ecosystem and designing and supporting the creation of learning experiences that use the technology. So I'm going to share some of those. And so, for example, the institution weighs impact of the free resource for actual cost. Actual cost, right? That showed up in paper, guys. That was the consumables that maybe you didn't think you'd need year over year and overlooked in your budget. You have to think about that as an administrator for your digital resources as well. All of the licensing aspects, all of the legal language, the DSA, as a teaching and learning person and as the IT administrator, you have to know all those things. You just do. It's your job. It's part of your job. And you can't just hand the thing off to the legal department and say, sweet guys, go take a look at it and let me know if it looks great. No, that's actually not true, because the questions are going to come to you. And if you're a building administrator, same. Guess where the questions are going to come? They're going to come to you. And so you need to know those, and you need to own that as a responsibility. So A couple more examples. There's more within the dictionary, but these are pulled out because they're pretty important. The next one is really progressively working toward full individualization and personalization, and that is an explicit movement toward. If you're not already there, you should be there, and there's plenty of models out there to use as you design, but are you actually doing that? You have a responsibility to. You actually do. You can't just think that it's an initiative, that it's a bright and shiny. No, actually, it's the way it is. It's today and it's normal. So let's embrace that and go. Also working toward increasing digital pathways, right? And so we're looking for the word workflow shows up in there. Are you have responsibility to help your system move toward that workflow in terms of experiences. Teachers, another layer, right? The difference here is that teachers have a professional responsibility for composition in systems, learning design, and student oversight. That's not brand new, right? Except for the composition in systems and also the learning design. There are a lot of us in the field who may not think of some folks may not think of themselves as learning designers, right? They're preparing teaching. They're thinking about teaching time. They're not thinking necessarily about how are my students all moving within a learning experience that I've created, and how can they all move at different paces and places, and yet you have that responsibility. So and student oversight again as well. This is where we start talking about logistics. Standards for students, again, another layer, but really this focuses on the students' interaction with the user interface and their experience with digital content, and then how are they advocating, how are they exercising agency in order to help themselves get what they need. Because ideally, then, if we roll down that scale, the educator has created an experience, and now the student has to take agency and start using that experience and know when things work, right? They need to know if an app works. They need to be mindful of when a tool doesn't meet their needs, and then go look for another one and advocate for that. So those are all very important. They're all very relative to this, which is sort of the end piece for our time today, but it's also sort of the kickoff, because this is where the stuff gets real, and this is where for me this is a great this gives me a map, right? And this gives me something to design around and with. And so the EduJedi model was developed with a lot of input from educators and a lot of our partners at the Learning Council. And what I want to share here is the Addie's model versus the EduJedi model. And this is really pretty indicative of kind of the shift in mindset that has to occur as we move into the next iteration of ourselves as educators and teaching and learning folks and technology. And so the Addie's model is fine, right? It's okay. It's 45 years old-ish. It has been around for a long time. It works fine. There's nothing definitely wrong with it, except that it really talks in terms of teacher centricity. And so you can take a look at any of those boxes at the top, and really what you start to pull out is vocabulary that indicates that it was written around a teacher planning for teaching, and it bypasses a number of critical elements in designing a learning experience that facilitate deeper understanding and build learner identity and foster student agency. And so the EduJedi model, there's a couple of distinct differences, and we'll go through those, but you'll see just in its design, it's broken out right into workflow design, and it's broken out into discovery design. And those two rows interact together, but they interact together because they're student-centered, learner-centered, and they start to grapple with logistics and some more critical thinking and higher level thinking and solving types of experiences. So here's an example to sort of illustrate what that might look like. This is a completely made up course, but what you might imagine that you could see on the left-hand side in that first box, which is the scope box, it might be checking, you might be checking the pacing guide for the next objectives, right? It has a couple of state standards you're teaching regarding a concept, and this one talks about using fractions, and then you have some additional courseware that helps the students to manipulate and visualize the fractions, right? And so that's a different function than talking about how are students moving to and fro within an experience. And so we talk about mapping and curation also, and so this aligns with sort of the development column of the Addies, which then talked about content creation, and we're not talking about content creation anymore, right? And so the mapping and idea curation, this is where in this example, 50% of the kids are remote, and you have the idea to add a hands-on experiment of students cutting up a fruit or vegetable and make it real, make it hands-on, right? And so you curate some other resources, an animation, and maybe it's a video, or maybe it's a chapter to read, or maybe it's a bunch of other things, and that's all going to help the learners to start to internalize and create some additional engagement. Right. And so then we move into design. We're then talking about going into the courseware to select the right modules. And you're starting to think in your mind, you're going, okay, how are my kids going to go through this? And what are the kids who are more advanced in terms of their pace? What are they going to do and where are they going to go? That's not actually new, right? I mean, teachers, we've been doing that. If we differentiate in the classroom, that's what we're doing, right? Except now we've got some additional resources that are going to help us to do that. And I love that. And then you move into implementation, right? Right. You set the first steps. Kids are logging in. You've got the instructions there. They move themselves through the various experiences and progress at their speed. If you have a more sophisticated tool set, then the feedback loop is being activated and questions are being answered and information is being given based on input. And then we see sort of the logistics or the intersection segment of the model. And so now that you've thought through where are the kids going to go, or the students going to go, and how are they going to get there, this is where you start to think about, okay, well, if some students are along a path at a certain pace, where are the intersection points where a human could intersect or a resource could intersect in order to help that student move to the next level, to give them some additional understanding and really help them to move through in a more meaningful and rich way, so that we can start addressing things like learning loss and engagement and checking out, right? And then we finally move over into that sixth column, which doesn't actually exist in the Addies model, and this is, are we going to continue along this, or is this a termination and we move on to the next thing? And those are considerations then that require that you start to unthink some things that we traditionally have been taught as teachers and have practiced ourselves into, right? This indicates a shift in practice, and it's very helpful. I'd love to hear some feedback on this as we get a little bit further. Here's a couple of ways that the model is different, and we talked about some of these, right? It's starting to address the time, place, space, and pace, and that's personalizing, right? If we're talking about those things, we're talking about personalized learning. This does that, whereas the Addie's model does not. It really talks about goal setting that is not really restricted to course or class, right? Because we're now thinking through in terms of workflow and how is a student moving and meandering and navigating through their experience. And seat time, no, it's not a thing. It just isn't. Really talks about automated synchronicity, and this is important actually, between academic standards, pacing guides, and lesson calendaring, and all of the sort of the logistical parts of an experience, and automating that, right? Using resources that we now have available to automate the synchronicity between those things, so that you're not constantly doing this, right? Because that's cumbersome. It's not sophisticated. We can do better. It really talks about rather than problems that are posed by the educator to problems that are identified and posed by the learner. We know that whether you're a Costas fan or whoever, the higher levels of questioning that occur within an experience really cause that learning to be sticky, right? And so we want to make sure that we're designing with that in mind. And this model really talks about that, and that's a difference. It's that inquiry model, and then really acknowledging sort of the emergence of academic standards of excellence, and not that those are brand new, but it does start to poke at how do we start to prioritize those things, and priority standards aren't brand new, right? But placed within a workflow system, that's a little bit new. That's some different ways of thinking. So that's the model in a very tiny eggshell. We could go to all kinds of time, and would love to with this particular conversation. This is really the standards are downloadable here, and this is where you can get them. If you hit the Learning Council site, you can see that there should be a little button over there. Know that we're going to be poking at people and looking for folks to begin to design with this. And what we're now looking for, we've gotten all the feedback, and we've designed something that with educators and administrators, something that seems like it should be good. And we've seen some examples for sure. But we also want to make sure that we're getting continuing input, and we'll be working into the next couple of years to build that bank of examples that use this model and start to use that workflow to personalize the experiences. So go get it and take a look at it. It's for sure something that's worthwhile. So I'd like to hop into a little bit of time, and LeiLani, I think we've got a few minutes left, right?
Yeah, so let's get some people wake up, start commenting, people.
Right.
Don't make me turn your camera on when you're not expecting it.
There's a giveaway. Yeah, there's a giveaway. I'll be giving away a trucker hat.
Woo! Yeah. Yeah, well, this was awesome. You did an awesome job getting through all that information. And I think really what we want people to know is they have to imagine a world where learning is Uberized. Because we all know how learning works, or like Uber works, right? Like you hit your app, it magically finds the nearest dude who will pick you up, and he agrees. And then they come over and you have this transactional ride, and then you go your separate ways. Like right now, the entire structure of teaching and learning is teacher-centric. It's a classroom. Like this is the way people think with their blinders on. It's like, then on the back of the teacher is all the discipline, all the, design. It's like you pile stuff on that individual, and you're doing it across your entire district and all schools. And it's not really elevating their personal humanity, right, when we need it the most.
Right. And it's not effective, right? I mean, it's cumbersome. It's not sophisticated.
But
so it doesn't work.
But honestly, I think here's the way I think with most teachers is they think they're a person on a stage.
For sure. Oh, absolutely. And
rather than the real, in other words, there's multiple definitions of teaching. I think what people really want, and it's really showing up in the purchase of consumer stuff, consumer learning, is what they want direct instruction. They want you to be a doctor of learning. Like, fix me. What's my prescription? Rather than a lecturer. And I think, Senator Howard Stevenson said this very well early when we started doing these webinars, Chris. He said, we're witnessing the death of whole group.
Right,
and we know that because this whole last year, we had everyone commenting, superintendents, everyone, Zoom fatigue is real. Of course it is. Right. It was we were fatigued by lecturing before.
Right. No, for sure. Absolutely. So that's so true. I mean, I as long as I've been working with educators around personalization, that's the thing, right? That you don't sit people down in a classroom in rows and talk at them about chemistry and then have them copy down. I sat in a class. Here's an example. One thing that I love to do as an administrator is bop into a classroom, sit down next to a kid and go, hey, what's going on? And more often than not, sadly, during this period of time, the kid would go, I don't know. And I'm like, what? Or they would say, well, I'm taking notes. And I'd look around and I'd say, well, where are you taking notes from? Because nobody's talking. and I don't see any text and I don't see any resources. And they're like, well, no, we're supposed to copy what's up here on the screen, and it's on a PowerPoint slide. And I said, well, whose ideas are those? And they're like, well, not mine. I said, well, when do you get to add your thinking? Are you guys going to talk together? How is that going to happen? And no. So every kid, right, is writing down the same thing off of the screen, and they're completely disengaged. They don't know. And now we toss them into Zoom, and they're like, thank God I'm in Zoom, because now I can go shop on Amazon on my side screen instead of doing that. Of course they're checking out.
Oh yeah. And superintendents have told us, like, if they put their lectures up online, like teachers put their lectures up or some other, all the high schoolers are doing 2 or 3 times speed through of all the video. Like they're like boring.
Absolutely.
So we're living in I think this is an epic moment because it is the death of the whole group, but that's so hard for administrators to think with, because they're thinking, are you talking about all online? No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a precision intersection with live teaching, right teacher, right time, right thing being taught. And some of it will be lecture style. We're not giving that up. Right. But we are going to give up the triaging, because the most epic thing that's happening right now is the convergence of a secondary line of assault on schools, which is there must be equity. We didn't have equity here's the biggest inequity of all, I think. A 150-year-old manufacturing model that is built to make everybody the same.
Right.
Equal. And so then we're like, make everybody the same, rolling down the tracks. Okay, now, on top of that, try to make it all different. I mean, this is just like, really? We're built for this.
Right.
Now, so let's just rebuild. Like, this is all I'm saying here.
For sure.
Which is what we heard from everybody in the EduJedi. They're like, we need to do this differently.
Yep.
Okay, well,
this absolutely.
Like, you can't do that with this. That's like Amazon trying to also be a store when it was only online. What are you doing?
Right.
Or vice versa, so yeah.
And that's a scary moment, right? I mean, there's not a lot of folks and systems that I know of who are willing to dump the Legos out on the table and then build something new based on a new spec and a new need. And yet that's what we have to do. We can't shoehorn, right? Shoehorning isn't effective. It's only going to end up in mud. And so I really, I've always been the one to stir things up and ask people to do that. But now more than ever, it's critical that we redesign. Let's go create something new.
So we have like 7 minutes, and then we're going to pull Ashley in, who's from Kearney School District. But I want to bring up this slide that we're looking at right now. We can go back to some other ones too. I took the mouse away.
Okay, control back. Okay, awesome.
So in terms of learning design, you kind of had to go through that pretty quickly in the example pretty quickly. But I just want to talk about, as you were saying it almost like if you're like an educator, the first thing you think is Chris talking about like the Jetsons, like where everybody gets like an easy button and like Mr. Jetson goes home and complains to his union boss, like, basically, I have to push the button way too many times today. This is really hard work. No, we're not talking about that. We're just, we're talking about do the right asynchronous mix so that when you're synchronous, it's like a perfection of use of your humanity as a teacher. Right.
Yeah, there has to be a blend, right? I mean, the word design is not an accident, right? It has to be designed. It has to be uniquely designed. And if you think of yourself as a planner, the planning is the thing that happens after the design. Your design is up front, and you're thinking about what am I doing and what are the learners doing, and most importantly, I'm designing that way. I'm designing outwardly facing. And that's a difference, and we see that all the time. Where if someone says you should be designing for learning and not planning for teaching, sometimes someone raises a paw or they go, "Huh? I didn't think of it that way, but that's an interesting distinction." Well, yeah, it is. we have to be designers. And I know of a few systems right now that have moved down that path, and they've caused a mindset shift, and they're now thinking about the design of the learning and what tools am I using in order to get there, and what are the students going to be doing at any given point. And then if I haven't thought about logistics, that's the big sticking point sometimes. Sometimes people get down the path and they've got a cleverly laid design. And as we all know in teaching, the best laid plan or design, it's going to have to shift. So you better stay nimble, because it's going to change. It definitely is, for sure.
Yeah. And then you and I, as we've been doing this tour across the country, just listening to all these educators talk about heart-wrenching happenings administratively, as well as with the teachers. Many superintendents that I've got 3 teachers in my office crying they can't get this all done. Yeah, and a lot of grief. Even what Ivy said this morning, it's like people have gone through this, and students are going through this great period of grief. And so what Learning Council is really saying with what Chris took you through about design, and how the system is designed, not the classroom, not the teacher themselves, but how the entire system is using teachers at their best attribute rather than just pummel them with more and more stuff to do, is really where we're at as a country. Mm-hmm. We're not built for this. Traditional public education isn't built for an entire flexibility on your physicality, whether you're here or there, remote. And the way that we structure teaching and learning isn't built for this age anyway. We all knew that, but the pandemic forced everybody's face into it really big time.
It was. It was a face plant for sure.
Yeah. And so it's really been a moment, and people are still struggling with it. And I think what we want to come back to is the message is what you were just wrapping up on in terms of the model. I want to go back to that. Of teaching and learning, the model has to move away from teacher centricity to, which is sort of like, retail had a centricity on the store, and then Amazon came by and ate everybody's lunch.
Right.
And the model is one-to-one recommendations engine. What's the next thing? Oh, you're shopping for this. What about these 16 things? Yep. And the algorithmic capacities, of digital are not well understood, and it moves the model. Now, Amazon has also bought up stores, so they do have a human storefront, right? So they backwards engineered the humanity because people wanted that, right? And then Walmart still has their greeters, right? It's practically their brand. They have to have a human greeter, kind of. So anyway, so this is just a really interesting moment to talk about model shift. Chris, thank you for taking us through all that.
Yeah, I love it. And we're going to be working on this into the future, helping and helping folks get a little bit further along the path.
Yeah. A lot to absorb. Yeah, and everybody wants to get this badge. If you want it, you have a badge from everything that Chris just took you through on digital learning experience. All right, so on to Carter. So, Carter is with ID Automation. I'm going to share my screen again. Here we go. ID Automation. I think I have you up on here. Yeah. So we're going to do some lunch and learns right now, but first with Carter. Carter, you can share camera if you want to. The thing about what we were just talking about, Carter, is that there's a need to reorganize. Like Ivy just talked a lot about some of the reorganization that's gone on so far, but the view that you guys have is a very interesting, innovative view of the future of individual identity, being able to cause personalization. And I just want to say, on the order of magnitude of like when you're shopping on the internet, like suddenly the internet knows you're shopping for kitchen sinks, and it starts showing you tile, and it starts showing you kitchen cabinets. It knows you. And I love that concept coming to the teaching and learning level on the school level, where they're helped by algorithmic inference because of their care about the identity management. So, Carter, are you there? Can I see you?
I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, so you go. Tell us what you guys are all about and what's happening.
Sure. Thanks, Lonnie. So yeah, as Lonnie was speaking about, we feel pretty strongly that the key to unlocking technology in the educational process is being able to understand the individual identity of the user, be that a teacher, a staff member, a student, a parent, whomever. And traditionally, what we have done holistically in the industry is focused on the identity from what are your user accounts, what's your password, and then any information that's associated with an individual application. What we feel is the evolution, the next step of that is really understanding the entire identity of what makes up an individual user as an individual person. So if we take like a 4D look at what an identity actually is, it's more than just the access that you have. It's also your demographic information. It's also your behavioral information. It's also change over time. How did you do last year? Where are you coming from? Where are you trying to go? And understanding all of this different context around the individual is what can inform and empower the instructional process to be more surgical and more effective. It is not at all to replace teachers. It is to empower teachers, remove all of the barriers that technology has put upon you guys, and really just help streamline the process so you can get back to doing what it is that you got into the space to do.
Yeah, I think you described that really well. I really like the idea of this, the identity is this thing that floats around between all these individual systems right now. In most instances, like, if Ivy buys another piece of software, she's got a roster into it.
Right.
But the roster is just a list, right?
Right.
And so coming with that name of that individual student is not like a bunch of things around their preferences. Like this person has this learning disability, or this one likes dinosaurs and blah, 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 and guitar playing. It's kind of vanilla. And we have to get away from vanilla for not only that workload issue, but also because vanilla means inequity. And that's a big deal. It seems like it's one of the big overarching themes this year already.
Yeah, the factory model that education has been for the longest time of here's kind of a one size fits all curriculum and approach, and the onus is put on the individual teacher to have to modify on the fly, understand each of their individual students and make that work. I used to be a high school teacher. And so if I had a class of 40 kids and I had 45 minutes to get through my content, make sure that each student was enabled and empowered and check for understandings so I could go remediate based on what their individual needs are. It's a really large task. And so there's so much potential, both for adding in context around the individual to where you don't have to do that guesswork yourself, but then also just from connecting your ed tech stack and your digital ecosystem so that there's a free sharing of information from from one application, one site to the next. One of the examples I love to use is like NWA's map growth has some really, really good context around like change over time and how a student's learning and aptitude is growing. Whereas Math IXL may be more real time of the student has taken these assignments, this many questions, this is how long it took them, this is how many attempts they have. But there's such a sea of data that's out there that we really just need it talking to each other, put in one place and condensed to where there's actionable insights so that I understand my individual student, teacher, staff, parent, whomever, just give them what they need.
I like it. So can I say legitimately, and then I'm going to move on to our next company, that this is a middleware technology? So you've got the system here and system there and other stuff going on, but it sits in here in the middle and does things for other things?
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate way to describe it. So middleware is a component of what it does. Really think of an identity engine as being the foundation and the engine that powers your entire ed tech ecosystem. And so if this concept resonates with anybody, we have a white paper that's out with Learning Counsel right now on the concept of identity infused education. And I would just invite anybody to go check out their site. There's fantastic content there, and ours is just one of that.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for being with us today, Carter. It was awesome. Love it.